Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the HKGAG podcast. So, today we have a bit more of a serious topic, and that is just we're going to discuss about sex education in Hong Kong. And generally, as we all know, sex education has quite a poor status in the city. So, I have three other guests on this podcast, and we have Lucy, Jono, and Megan. Do you guys want to do a small introduction?
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Lucy. I am currently a student paramedic studying in the UK. But I was born and raised in Hong Kong, so I like to think I've got a little bit of knowledge still there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm a law student in Australia. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I went to two different international schools, so I have like, two very different points of view about sex ed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm John. I was born in Malaysia but grew up in Hong Kong, currently living in Australia. Um, Growing up in a very conservative Christian school, so sex education was not really a thing. So it'll be interesting to see what everyone has to say.
All right. So, yeah, and also FYI, Megan was in the previous podcast episode from last season. So, yeah. Anyways, so what? So, Lucy and Megan, since you went to international schools. What do you think? Do you think that what is the status of, like, we all know that sex education is quite poor in local schools. Like, is it any better in international, or is it just as bad, or like barely any better?
I don't think, well, back in ICS, there's pretty much not little to no sex education spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't think it's any better compared to local schools, or pretty much none,
Yeah.
if I'm honest.
So I went to Singapore International from kindergarten up until secondary 2, and I'm pretty sure that year 9, year 8. So I had the first sex ed class in year 8.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, since people not gonna be shy about this, but girls been getting their period earlier and earlier now because of, your diet and everything. So to have sex ed classes at secondary 2, I found it quite late because I already had my period in primary 6. So that's 2 years before. So back then, I was completely clueless. I was just like, oh yeah, I bleed into work. And people were obviously shy about like pads, tampons, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like we could go to the school nurse and get supplies and things. So it was a bit kind of like a drug deal, a bit shameful when you had to go to the toilet. You don't want to say, oh, I'm on my period out loud. And then back when we had sex ed classes, I remember all the girls being super shy about it, and no one wanted to talk about anything, even though we knew what was happening with our bodies. We knew we were bleeding once a month, we knew eggs were getting released, we knew we could get pregnant, but obviously everyone was super shy about it. And
Right.
I remember the teachers just being like, oh, you can get pregnant now. Here's a condom. This is what condom does. This is STDs. They kind of used it as a scary tactic to like get you to be abstinent. So I guess the emphasis on don't have sex was really heavily placed on us. It was don't have sex, nothing will go wrong kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, Lucy, do you have anything you want to say? Right, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm talking to Lucy. I think someone went out for Mike, but okay. We'll just yeah, like you were saying, I think Hong Kong is a very conservative society, and also, in addition to the secondary factor, a lot of schools are very Christian based, like especially local schools. Um, that's kind of led to a culture of promoting
Sorry.
apps. Oh, Lucy, it's okay. Yeah, I was.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I was messing around my like mic settings.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry.
Yeah, I was about to say, as an international student, I went to an international primary and secondary school. But my brother, on the other hand, he's 2 years younger than me. He went to a local primary school and then an English medium, like he went to a local primary school and then an English medium, secondary local school. And the like impression that I got from that school was that there was no sex ed at all, like none that I knew of. It was a Catholic
Mhm.
school. They were very like conservative about it. And it was pretty much something that was like my dad's job to teach my brother. So whilst I had this education at school and a bit of backstory, I grew up with my dad growing up. My parents were separated, so I didn't have my mum to teach me this kind of stuff. So a lot of my sex ed came from school and what my dad was comfortable to talk to me about. Um, but with my brother,
Okay.
he pretty much had no education that I knew of back then.
Okay. Um. So what about? So you're talking about the local school mainly. So what about the international school then?
Oh, the sex ed in international schools, to be honest, they could be better, but it's a good thing that they have it in the first place anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the first proper sex ed which we have like in international schools starts at year 6 in primary school.
Oh,
Um,
really? Damn.
yeah, so when you're about 10, 11, 12-ish, um, that's when they start teaching you, like they'll divide the boys and the girls up into different classes. And like for girls, they spoke to us about like periods, about puberty, what to expect, you know, um, things like feminine hygiene, um, and they touched on a little bit about attraction, like this is what's going to happen, this is how your body will change and how you'll feel, this is why. Um, so they would divide like the boys and the girls up um initially, and then towards the end when they've learned about their respective like things that would happen to their bodies, um it'd be a mixed gender class at the end of it where they would just talk about like general puberty and things to expect so that it wasn't too embarrassing to teach these 11-year-old kids about puberty, but also that each gender would touch on like different aspects of puberty for the other gender, which was kind of nice. Um,
Oh. Hmm.
like it wasn't totally separated, which I thought was nice. Um, because again, growing up, if you're not taught a lot about, you know, the other person and their body, um, that you're gonna grow up with a lot of misconceptions, which you'll get from, a lot of like wrong information. You'll get a lot of wrong information and a lot of misinformation, unless you are taught about that kind of stuff. Um, yeah.
Mhm. So
Yeah,
it's
I guess
interesting.
that's
Yeah, go ahead.
different. I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say, when Lucy was saying that she started learning about that in like year 6, I'm guessing
Mhm.
it's because like she went to an ESF school. But with Singapore International, I remember in primary school, the first time we ever learned anything about sex was in biology when we were learning about sexual reproduction. That was kind of really the first thing, like the first sex related thing we've ever learned in class. It wasn't learning about like girls' bodies, it was learning about sperm, egg, boom, pregnant, that whole thing, rather than how it happens. And
I
Mhm.
then
think,
so when we were in secondary
sorry.
too, to give you like an age range, that's like that's 13. So at 13, we were taught, oh, if you have sex, you will get an STD. And then
Bruh.
STD leads to problems, problems lead to death. So don't have sex. So that was basically the lesson that we got. And then they did say, though, if you do have sex, use a condom. This is how you use a condom. That's all. But don't have sex. Sex leads to problems. So it was that kind of thing.
Sorry, what I was gonna say was like with a lot of the sex ed that I had growing up in ESF, they took very much like a
Mhm.
holistic approach with it. So it wasn't entirely biological. It also took into account, emotional changes, um, you know, like social, I guess, like how it would affect like people like socially as well. Kind of like the stigma around it as well, trying to break that stigma that puberty is an embarrassing thing for kids. It's not, it's natural. Um, and I remember like during one of the classes, like we had to go through different like keywords about puberty and about like reproductive systems and like, bodies. And we had to like learn what they meant, what they were. Um, it wasn't too in depth. We were 11 at the time. But it was just so we had this understanding about it before we went into secondary school. Because of
Yeah,
course, especially for girls at that
that's a
age,
good
girls were
approach.
going through puberty, earlier than boys were at the time. So it made sense. It was age appropriate. It prepared us for what we were going to learn in secondary school, where they went into a lot more depth about, relationships, gender identity, sexuality, contraceptives, STIs, things like consent as well was really important. But they did it in a very age appropriate manner. So they were teaching us things like consent and STIs when we got to around 14, 15, 16.
Yeah, I definitely get what you mean, I guess, with kind of like preparing you for secondary school. And I believe that is probably really just the best approach you can have for someone like that. So sorry, I'm just kind of rambling. Okay, so we're going to discuss next kind of the consequences of kind of poor sex education. So, what would you say are the major consequences of sex education in Hong Kong?
A big one is misconception. A lot of people don't know that much about sex and they see it as a taboo thing.
Hmm.
Because they've been grown up to, they've grown up thinking this is something you should avoid, this is something that's like sinful and, dirty. Um, you're gonna have a lot of like teenagers and young adults trying to explore something that they've been told is a wrong thing. They're going through it unguided, they've got no knowledge about it, and a lot of the times that can be really harmful because, like, especially sex, it's a really intimate thing for some people. And if you're going through it not knowing what to expect, that's a really scary thing. Um, and because you're not being exposed to what healthy sexual relationships are and how like sexual intercourse should play out in a healthy way and a safe way as well. Safe is really important. You're more likely, not most, you're more likely to be trying to explore this scary thing on your own. um and it's likely that it's going to be unsafe or unhealthy.
Yes. And okay, Megan, do you have anything you want to say just before?
Because I would say that you're what most people lose it maybe. I think when I was hearing about like people losing their virginity, they were saying like they lost it between the age of like 14 to 17. Like that would be
Jesus.
the majority. And then so I'm taking that, you're going through puberty, you probably watch stuff on your computer, like you watch porn, right? So
Uh,
maybe a lot of people would learn stuff from porn, but that's not what real sex is like, that's more dramatized, that's more
of
rough.
course.
And so if you're learning through porn, that's not exactly very healthy for you and the person you're doing it with. So that's just another thing that's just not great, you know?
Yeah, I
Of
wanted
course.
to add with that as well. With the consumption of pornography online, you're gonna, especially if you're starting to consume porn at a younger age, you're gonna grow up with some, like for example, with a lot of young girls that start watching porn at a younger age, they'll grow up having these expectations which aren't healthy about, how they should look, how their bodies should look, how they should act, because they're taking this example from, like
Very,
pornographic
yeah,
media online, which is scripted. It isn't like anywhere close to the real thing. And a lot of it is so, like every detail's perfected. The makeup is retouched up like every, I don't know, 10 minutes. you know and same with young boys as well. Young boys are going to be consuming this kind of media expecting the wrong kind of expectations of themselves and the opposite gender. When I say the opposite gender, I'm thinking very like binary, like male and female. um you know
yeah. Don't worry
I
about
will
it.
go into sort of like the other identities as well, but just in terms of general like education, it is very binary. Um, and that's another thing which I hope changes in the future. The current sex education at the moment is very binary, and it's very much relating to if you are assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. Um, but regardless, consuming pornography at a young age can be really damaging to your like mental health and your self-esteem.
Yes. Oh, Jono, do you have anything you want to add?
No,
If you,
no,
oh
no,
yeah.
not really. Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna move on to the questions that were asked when they did a question box a few weeks ago. So the first question is, what age is best to lose your virginity?
Well,
Which,
that's a very
yeah,
taboo subject
yeah,
because I guess
mm,
it's just whenever you are ready, personally. Because for me,
pardon? Yeah,
it
sorry.
just depends on when you're ready,
Mm,
or if you're willing to do that at such a like young age.
Because
But
yes.
yeah,
I remember the first time I moved to South Island, and I remember I was talking to people, I was getting close with my friends, we were talking about boys, and then we were talking about virginities, and then I remember a lot of people ranging from like 15, 16, and I was like, whoa, that's quite young. And I felt like, oh, am I supposed to be already having sex? And then I remember thinking, I was like, am I behind? So I always tell everyone who hasn't lost it yet that they should always do it when they're ready. And if that
Yes.
means waiting until marriage, by all means do it. And
Yeah.
like if you're just not ready, you're not comfortable doing it yet, don't. You don't have to keep up with
Yeah.
people, You shouldn't be
Like,
keeping up with people. You shouldn't be like thinking to yourself, oh, am I behind? Is this a disadvantage?
Yeah, the
Or
thing
is the
the thing
dating scene going to be different for me? No, it doesn't matter. You know, the right age is when you feel ready. So that's different for everyone.
yes. Like, it may seem kind of conservative, but really it's the best option. Like, when you're ready, don't rush it. Don't. This isn't like a very conservative viewpoint. It's just a more mature, educated viewpoint. Sorry, Lucy, do you want to add? I just went on a bit of a tangent. Sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
it's not a race at the end of the day. It's up to everyone and how you feel. Sometimes it'll happen. That's what happened with me. Sometimes it just happens. Um, if you feel like emotionally, mentally, and physically ready, that's something that only you know. But also keep in mind, like, are you ready in terms of do you have the resources or the equipment to protect yourself if you are going to engage in that kind of sexual activity, you know? Um, because what you don't want to do is lose your virginity and I don't know, catch an STI or get pregnant. Um, some people do. It's personal choice. Um, but at the end of the day, you want to be protected. You want to be safe if you're doing it. Um, so if you feel safe and you have the means to be protected and do it in a safe manner, then go ahead. You know. Um, but I'll touch in on this a little bit more later on about consent. Um, you shouldn't feel pressured or pushed into feeling like you should lose your virginity because that means you're not ready. Um,
Yes.
and as well, keeping in mind the age of consent in Hong Kong is 16. Um, again, some people lose it before they turn 16. The law is there for a reason. It's to protect you. Um, and yeah, I mean, at that age, most people would have been a little bit developmentally a little bit more ready for it. But again, you know, as long as you feel ready for it, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move on to the next question. That's okay with everyone. And the second question is, why are men so misinformed about female sexual anatomy?
This one's a really good one. I personally believe it's because female bodies were like have been seen as such a taboo thing in history. Especially with like menstruation. That was even till now, it's such a taboo thing. It's something that's seen as sinful and dirty and unhygienic and unholy. Um, and that's something that needs to change because it's a natural process that happens in a female body. Um, and it's nothing to be ashamed of at the end of the day. Um, as well, partly I think it's to do with you know, like pornography and the access of pornography and also a lot of education. I feel like a lot of girls sort of grow up and learn about it, um, just through education or other means. But for example, like periods and the menstrual cycle, it's still kind of like a grey topic for guys. Some guys don't know what a period is or how the menstrual cycle works. Um, and to be honest, I can't really think of a male equivalent for a period, anything that would require that kind of understanding, like different hormones that are released during that time, the different processes that happen in a female body and the emotional effects of having a period and like going through your menstrual cycle. Whereas with a male, it's very much physiological. They have a penis, they have testicles, they produce sperm. It's not very hard to understand. Whereas with things like the menstrual cycle, pregnancy, those kind of processes, and like changes in the female body, especially with like menopause as well. Menopause is still pretty misunderstood. And that's something that isn't really taught about much, especially in
Mhm.
schools. Um, things like periods were very much just taught to girls because, you're gonna grow up, you're gonna have a period. This is why you have a period. Boys don't have that, so they're not really taught about it, if you get what I mean.
Yes, I get what you mean. Um, Megan and John, do you guys have anything else you want to add on to that?
Mm, yeah, I guess
Oh,
everything Lucy said was exactly how I would have written it. But I
oh,
would have guessed like a lot of
yeah.
people, like a lot of males, I won't say all of them, but I'd say majority of them, if say they don't have a sister, they'd probably not really like they won't really understand what's really happening. They won't experience like, the full thing, the whole emotional aspect of it, your cravings, like the weird side effects you get, like having a shit when you're on your period, or like how your sleeping pattern changes, like, how your mood changes, how just the smallest thing sets you off. Or, and the fact that the menstrual cycle for female is like 3 weeks out of the 4 weeks in a month. let's be honest, we only have 1 week of break from our menstrual cycle, and it's, a lot of men just think the period is that 1 week when you're bleeding, because I guess that's what's visible, and that's probably what they understand as like, oh, don't talk to her, don't piss her off, she's on her period. When in fact, our menstrual cycle is 3 weeks out of the 4 weeks.
I was
And
about
I
to
don't.
say, sorry, the menstrual cycle is actually 4 weeks. It's a
Oh,
cycle. Um, like there are phases during that cycle where your hormones sort of go up, different hormones go down, different
yeah.
processes happen. Um, yeah, it is a constant cycle from the ages of like 9, 10, 11, 12 onwards until you're about, in your 50s, really.
Mm,
Um, and all these different hormone changes, which are constantly like, going up and down and changing, that has a real impact on how you feel emotionally and physically as well. So not only are you having your period, these hormones are affecting, you're going to have stomach cramps, leg cramps, back pain, um, breast like soreness as well, tenderness. It's going to affect how much oil you produce on your face. So a lot of women will break out before they have their periods. And the emotional impact as well, you know, there's a lot more, I guess, talk and research about PMS, so like premenstrual syndrome and premenstrual depressive disorder. Um, and that has links with, your menstrual cycle because it's all the different hormonal changes in your body with quite a large amount of females. Their hormones aren't going to be exactly, you know, increase to this point and then decrease at a certain point. Sometimes they can go out of whack, sometimes they can get unbalanced, and they can have a lot of health issues from that. Um, and along with this as well, the physical impacts from this, you know, for example, like females who have endometriosis, for example, or polycystic ovary syndrome, that's really painful, and it's always seen as something exclusively for females to deal with. Because it's still not talked about enough. It's still like a hush hush thing. And that's why there isn't a lot of research around it still, or a lot of talk or information about it still.
Mhm.
yeah, and I was gonna say that like when you're scrolling on TikTok, say for me, I come across a lot of videos where like these girls are telling guys like there are 3 holes down there, this happens on our periods are synced up, stuff like that. And the guys are just like, no, there's no way, it's fake. Like you guys are lying, all that. But in reality, we're really not. And I think it all really comes down to education or the lack thereof. So,
Yes.
because I know for me, I'm a girl, and in sex ed, I learned about the guys. But when we came out of it, they didn't know anything about us. So, yeah. So there's just a lack thereof for the guys about the girls because,
Yeah, I think because I'm lucky enough that I grew up in a majority female household, so I kind of understood what a period was and what my sister actually goes through, and just being able to, as a guy, looking into what a female menstrual cycle is, just being able to just, I guess, understand the needs and what's happening with a female body is very important for us as guys to like know, because I feel like a lot of guys don't know what a period is and what everything is or to do with a period. So I guess, yeah, it's just hard because like not a lot of guys have the access to knowledge to what a period is, but I'm just lucky enough to have the access to it. So
I think with some
Yes.
males as well. I mean, I don't speak for all males, but I think the general, like, not general, I think there are some males out there who have this kind of mindset that it's like, it's not my issue. That's something my sister or my mum has or my girlfriend has, and it pisses me off because she gets annoyed. there's still very much this mindset of, oh, she's being a bitch, she's on her period. Um, Luckily, I don't hear a lot about that now. It is changing now.
Yes.
But back then, that was still very much the case. Like, you know, oh, she's having a bad day. She's in a bad mood. She's on a period. It was that kind of like mindset and the way that it was looked at.
Yeah, that sounds just irresponsible. Yeah. Sorry, just thinking about it, I guess. Okay, so the next question. There's actually a question. I want to get some of the shorter questions first. So, the next question is 16 a correct age to have sex? Again, we kind of answered that, but what do you guys think?
Fuck no. Just whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I
In
think
in
I
terms of the
agree with
law,
Jono.
in terms of the law,
Someone asked that. Pardon? No,
in terms
the law is 16 is the age of consent, as Lucy
yeah,
said
so in
earlier.
terms of the law, 16 is the right age. Any lower than that is
Illegal.
under the age of consent. It is statutory rape. Um, again, age of consent differs from country to country and state to state. But in terms of the law, 16 is the right age, 16 and over. But
But
again, it's up to your like how you feel physically and mentally and emotionally. You don't have to turn 16 and lose your virginity. You can be, I know people in their 20s and they still haven't yet because they still don't feel ready. They haven't found the right person to lose it with. And that's fine.
yeah, definitely. Um, Lucy, what do you think? Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, again, it's personal preference. It's how you feel at the end of the day, if whether or not you feel ready for it. Um, and not a lot of people will know if they're ready for it until it kind of leads up to that moment, and then they're like, oh, hang on for a moment, I don't feel ready for this. And it's okay to say that. Um, but again, in terms of the law, 16 is the right age. In terms of you and yourself, if you're 16 and you don't feel ready, you don't feel ready, you know?
Yeah,
And
simple as that.
that's not a bad thing.
Okay, next question then. How should instructors combat teenagers being immature when teaching sex ed? Like, how should teachers try to combat this?
To be honest, I don't think you can do a lot about it. It's individual at the end of the day. If you want to be immature about it, they're going to be immature. If,
Yeah,
sorry, excuse me.
it's okay.
If you're in a class and there are people being immature about the topic of sex ed, that's down to them. If they don't want to learn, that's their issue. Um, do keep in mind about what you're learning though. So, disregard them. That's their education at the end of the day. If you want to learn about it and you're interested about it, don't feel bad for that. Don't feel like you've got to miss out just because a few people don't want to learn. Um, I was fascinated with it growing up because I didn't have that at home. So any chance I got where I could talk about this kind of stuff, you know, I wanted to learn. This was great for me. Um, but in terms of immaturity, people mature differently in terms of like, topics like this, like, oh, girls have boobs and guys have a wiener, like, you know, um, everybody's gonna come to it at some point in their life, whether it's earlier or later. If they're immature at the moment, chances are they'll change. They'll realize that actually, I was kind of stupid for thinking that way at that age. But now that I'm older, I understand why I was taught this.
Yeah, because
Megan,
I was gonna say, like, so my grandma was a gynecologist and, she did OB as well. So I learned a bit from her, but obviously there's that generational gap where it's not really okay for them to talk about it so openly.
Yes.
But she did explain to me, like, a bit scientific. Like, she explained it to me a little bit scientifically, though. And then she explained, like, why. Like, I was talking about how my old school, Singapore International, they did the whole STDs bad equal die, that whole thing. My grandma explained to me why, the why of everything. Like, why are STDs bad? How can you get them? Like, why you shouldn't get them, and then how you should treat them. The whole why, how, what, that whole thing. So that was a plus for me. And obviously, if people are going to be like, you're in a class, you're learning about it. And obviously, since I knew the knowledge, I kind of put my input into class, and I'm like, oh, actually, da 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 is not right. Da 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 won't kill you. Da 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 sex isn't bad. It's just a bit taboo. That's all. And then obviously, teachers weren't exactly happy about that, but my classmates were more than happy because they knew themselves that what the teachers were saying was not exactly right, because one moment they were saying, oh, it's treatable, but you can die. Oh, it's treatable, don't do it.
Oh,
So obviously people were gonna be like, oh my god, ha ha ha, penis, ha ha ha, boobs, ha ha ha, vagina. So that's expected. You're what? You're 13. You're gonna be immature. You're gonna be like a bit shy, and you're gonna be like, ha ha ha, ha ha, penis. That whole thing. You're gonna find ways to like lighten up the mood. I do that. Like, if I'm in a weird situation, I laugh about it. Because what am I supposed to do? So I guess it's that kind of thing where it's either you're immature, fine. You're 13, you're immature, expected. Or if you're uncomfortable, you laugh off. That's expected too. So you can't really do anything about it. There's not much you can do. It's up to you whether you want to take the information in at the end of the day or not take it in. Up to you
yeah.
if you want to process that, if you don't want to process that, you know. But at least the option for sex ed was there, even if it wasn't good.
Okay. We're gonna move on to the next question. And the other question is: should sexualities be included in sex ed in schools? If so, how much of it? So I think this is like referring to things like the non-binary and gender fluid and intersex. So
So,
what do you guys think?
so the typical stuff is between male and female. Yeah, they have sex, okay? But I
Yeah.
remember I was taught gay sex equals AIDS equals die.
Oh my fucking god.
So there was that. And obviously, that's not very true. So, I mean, I would like to see it improved in a way where you don't get the gay sex equals AIDS equals die. Rather, you do the gay sex protected equals good, you know?
Yes.
So, obviously, people are going to have
Yes.
questions about female female relations, male and male relations. And you don't want to do a thing where you kind of scare them. So you don't want
I
to do the
think
thing
just
where you're
the
like, AIDS equal die. That's
Yeah.
like not good. That's not good at all. You want the information, even if it's heavy. Someone's gonna take it in, someone's gonna process it at the end of the day, someone's gonna understand. Someone might come to terms with themselves and be like, oh yeah, maybe this is what I'll expect when I find a partner. If they flow that way. Rather than, experience it the hard way and realize, no, that wasn't right. I didn't have AIDS, I'm not gonna die. And let's be honest, AIDS now, there are preventative measures. There are, if I'm not wrong, there are stuff to prevent it from progressing. There's
Yeah, but with
medicine, right?
HIV, if you are worried that you may have been exposed to HIV in one way or another, you can get tested. Like, you have to get tested straight away. I think it's within 3 days, maybe. correct me if I'm wrong, but if you believe you've been exposed to HIV, get yourself to a sexual health clinic straight away as soon as you can, because the sooner they get that dealt with, the more chance you have of not developing HIV and later on AIDS.
John,
yeah,
do you have
there you
anything
go.
to add to this? Do you have anything you want to add? Okay, I'm just assume that I'm gonna give my a few there's a few cents on this. Like you said, I think understanding that would also normalize this LGBT identities in our society and really just kind of again have a more correct way of presenting sex ed and treating it less as a taboo. And yeah, so the next question is, and it's also our final question: how has sex ed changed since 2019 in
2019.
Hong Kong? I believe, yeah.
Gosh.
So
I'm not too sure. I think there's a lot more being done for LGBTQ plus representation in Hong Kong.
and I think they
Especially
mean more like sex ed in general, not just
sex ed.
LGBT. Not really. Yeah.
I mean, I like I'm not quite sure. Um, but in terms of sex ed, just more representation. I see it a lot more, just even like on the news. Um, in terms of general sex ed, I'm not sure much has changed. It seems pretty much very, standard, especially in ESF. But there is a lot more emphasis on, like same sex, um, like uh, relationships and, you know, looking at sex in a healthy way if you're LGBTQ. Because if you are LGBTQ and you don't quite align with like, all the like sex is taught in a very binary way. It's very much male and female. Um, and a lot of the times that's not going to relate to you if you're not like binary. So if you are non-binary or if you are trans, you know, because it doesn't take into account that not everybody is going to follow that way. So there's a lot more, I guess, education about things like gender identity and sexuality in terms of sex and how to also keep you know, how to approach sex in a healthy and safe manner, even if you are LGBTQ in this day and age. I say that's like a bad thing. I mean it as a good thing, approaching it like anyone else, like it's not a taboo thing if you are
Yes.
like, you know.
Mhm. Like
Yeah, I agree with Lucy. Since I haven't been back, well, I came back last year, but I think the LGBTQ community is a lot more talked about now, and more
definitely.
a lot more comfortable being talked about. Because like since 2019, there was literally like if any gay couple or lesbian couple was out in public, just eyes and judgment from everyone. But I feel like now is a very comfortable topic that everyone's talking about.
I wouldn't
In my
go
opinion,
as far.
that's what I've seen when I came back
Sorry. Yeah.
when I came back last year.
Yeah. I
But
wouldn't say as far as sorry. I wouldn't say as far as to like say it's like an open talk where everyone's like, oh yeah, it's good, but like it's definitely less of a taboo, which is always a good thing.
It's
but
more
it's
considered society, I guess.
Yeah.
Educational society I'm talking about.
To be honest, I honestly didn't really know much about LGBT, like the community here, because I always thought they were just, other people. They just had a different preference. Because I grew up like my godmother, she is, in a lesbian relationship. And my dad's closest friends are, again, lesbian relationships. So I kind of grew up around two
Oh,
lesbian
really? Yeah.
couples. Yeah, so I grew up around two lesbian couples. So I didn't
Mm.
really know. All I knew was they couldn't get married because of the law, because Hong Kong didn't like the
Of
fact,
course. Yeah.
that's what I knew. And then I was like, why don't they get married overseas? Like a lot of people do that, right? If I'm not wrong, I think people do that.
Yeah, a lot of
But
people
then,
do that.
yeah, but
Yeah,
then I
I think a lot of
realized
people do.
even if they get married overseas, it's not going to be recognized here. They're not going to be legally partners. They're not going to be legally able to adopt a child, say that, okay? So there are things they miss out on. There are things we miss out on in terms of education. Like we don't know much about what's going on with them, which isn't really sex ed, but I think it'd be nice to be included in sex ed, to show how like how heterosexual and homosexual couples, how they differ, what struggles they have. It'd be nice to know just as like a little extra, just a thought.
Yeah,
Wait,
especially. Sorry, I was gonna say like
Sorry.
especially I guess currently there's a lot more talk about representation of asexual people in Hong Kong because I think there is quite a notable community in Hong Kong who are asexual and are spoken about a lot.
Yes.
They tend to be like excluded from a lot of like the LGBT like conversations, which
Mhm.
they're part of that. Um, so it's good that I guess not Hong Kong as a whole because Hong Kong is still pretty conservative, but the actual community themselves and the people, like allies are trying to be more progressive about it within society.
Yes. Yeah, I think yeah, it actually reminds me a while ago, I think HKFB ran a few articles on like the asexual community. And of course you obviously you're gonna get a lot of homophobic, very acephobic comments, but there was a lot more support, which was very nice to see. And it's good to see that, Hong Kong Free Press was covering it since pretty much no one did at that point. And even I wasn't really aware that Hong Kong had such a large asexual community. Like obviously I knew it existed, but I didn't know how big they were.
Yeah,
And
I was gonna say as
it's
well. Sorry, you continue.
no, I'm finished. You want to say something?
I was gonna say as well. I remember when we were learning about consent at school, and like the teacher that was teaching us this, she was telling us how the age of consent for hetero, like two hetero individuals having like heterosexual like intercourse, was the age of consent for that was 16. However, to have anal sex in Hong Kong, the age consent for that is 21, which, you know,
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense because it's for gay men, the age of consent is 21, and that includes like anal sex as well. So the age consent for that is 21. But if you want to have, like penis and vagina penetrative sex, the age of consent for that is 16, which I don't think that's fair because like it sets apart, that you can have sex in this way as long as you're a guy and a girl. But if it's sex between two gay guys, two gay males, you have to wait until you're 21. And they can argue that's, it's because of I don't know, HIV risk. You can still get HIV at 16 in a male and female, intercourse. Um, so yeah, I find it kind of discriminatory. I can't lie. And I remember bringing that up with the teacher. I was like, "How come it's 16 for like two hetero individuals, but 21 for two homosexual males?" And she was like, "I don't know. That's a law." She didn't think it was fair either, to be honest.
yes. What was I saying again?
Actually,
Sorry.
um,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think out of all of us, I think you were the one in Hong Kong the most. What do you think has changed for sex ed?
You're talking to me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Well, first of
Because
all, I'm no longer in secondary school. If you can tell, I'm no longer in secondary school, so I
but
can't really
what have
tell.
what have you noticed that's different?
But what have I noticed? Good point.
Yes.
I haven't noticed much, but I guess more of an increased tolerance. Like it's still very much a taboo, but I wouldn't say it's as much as a taboo. Like a lot of LGBT awareness groups and focus groups, what they've done is kind of raise awareness of kind of like kind of like sex education and STDs and how to prevent them. And I feel like this is kind of this out of classroom education that people can easily learn from like social media. And of course, you shouldn't only be getting your info from social media, but them doing this is much better than nothing, and it's very, very good. And yeah, so basically what I said, like there's a long way to go, but things have improved, even if it's just by a little bit. Progress is progress. And oh god, that sounds a bit cringy, but whatever. That's my
Yeah,
point.
it makes sense.
And
Makes sense.
okay, so now we're gonna start wrapping up the podcast. So with one more question. What do you think are the what would like if you were in charge of say like the education system, like what specifically would you do to kind of change how sexual education is taught, or rather how it should be taught, given that it's not really taught in schools? Like, let's talk about okay.
I would say with sex education, just be open about it, like
Yeah.
if a student asks you to go into detail, like obviously in an age appropriate way, but just, explain it to them, explain why this happens. If they understand why certain things happen and the way it happens, they're not going to want to find out by themselves. Um, and as well, just being more inclusive, I guess. Um, being more mindful. I guess there's a lot more talk about consent and how like yeah, they're including a lot more consent in terms of sex education. Um, knowing, what's okay, what isn't okay, and you know, like what isn't healthy as well in relationships. That's another thing that's being taught a lot more now as well is unhealthy relationships. Especially like during your teenagehood, I guess you could say. Um, understanding that what can be seen as manipulative, what counts as abuse in a relationship and what isn't healthy, things like that. And that comes under consent as well, because if you're being treated that way and your feelings aren't being recognized, then that's not healthy. And that's a big thing, I think. That's still something that isn't spoken a lot about. Because I feel like a lot of people have this idea that when you're in an abusive relationship, you're an adult. Um, that's not true. A lot of teenage relationships can still be abusive. Um, and this goes towards like all genders as well. You can be abusive to your partner, whether or not you're a male or female, anything in between, and other, Um, anybody can be abusive. And that's something that's being taught a lot more in schools is if you're in a relationship with somebody and they're treating you this way, that's not okay. And, you know, if you feel ready, you should talk about it and you should tell somebody because most likely you're going to be feeling very vulnerable in that moment. But just that one, like that small push for you to reach out and tell somebody like, hey, I'm in this relationship. I feel trapped. I don't think this is healthy for me. And I think they're actually being manipulative or abusive towards me. That's the first step in you getting help and getting yourself out of that unhealthy relationship, which is so important in this day and age, especially with social media, because everything is just out there now. Um, but knowing those resources and knowing where to get help and where and when to get help, sorry, is so important. And it's something which I'm glad is taught a lot more in schools, because abuse can happen at any age. Um, same with abuse from family members as well growing up. a lot of kids will go through sex ed and realize that they're actually being abused by people. Um, for example, like from family members or a family friend. And this is still something that's very taboo. And a lot of people don't like to talk about it because nobody likes to talk about abuse. But it's something that has to be spoken about. And, the more that it's spoken about, the more likely we can get help for those who are being abused. Um, and it's breaking down that stigma and making them feel less ashamed that they're going through this experience. Because if you are being treated this way and you are experiencing abuse, it's not your fault. It's not your fault at all. Um, and some people choose to get help and some people don't, and that's entirely up to their choice. It's a very personal thing, and it doesn't make your abuse any less just because you haven't reported it or you haven't told somebody about it. You know, you are just as much valid as anybody else that has experienced that. And it's a terrible thing. It shouldn't
Mm,
happen, but it does. Um, so when you are experiencing that kind of stuff, you know, it helps to have those kind of resources, that kind of education at school as well. So you're more likely to recognize and be like, what's going on right now to me isn't healthy, you know, because, and same with grooming as well. Gosh, I keep thinking of all these different things. Grooming is such an important one because it still happens. And I think it's getting worse with social media, just the prevalence of social media and the access to social media. And it's the age for all of this is getting younger and younger. Younger kids are having access to the internet, and all the times it's unsupervised. Um, if you're having some form of sexual education at school, and it's including things like abuse, things like unhealthy relationships, things like grooming, you know, grooming is horrible. You don't
yeah,
realize
it
you're being
sucks.
groomed until afterwards, until you're much older and you look back on it and you're like, shit, I've been groomed. I was being groomed that time
Yeah,
because
that happened to me.
it's such a manipulative process. And like, if I remember correct, well, I'm pretty sure it is. I think in the UK, grooming's illegal. I'm not sure about Hong Kong because Hong Kong's still a little bit behind on those kind of laws.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
Um,
rape is illegal, so yeah. So
yeah, and at the end of the day, if you're being persuaded and pushed and coerced into doing something you don't want to do, especially in a sexual manner, under the age of 16, that's illegal. And you can get them, you know, investigated for that. And a lot of the times, if it's clear and, if you're under the age of 16, that's illegal. And it doesn't like just include like penetrative sex. If they do anything in a sexual manner, that's illegal. That counts as, breaking the law for the age of consent. That counts.
mm, all right.